Everybody?
Yep.
Is Dylan with us too?
No, he's online.
Okay, it's 5:30. I'd like to bring this finance committee to order. First up, approval of tonight's agenda. Moved by Mr. Forsyth, second by Mr. Denisha. Any discussion about the agenda? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Approval of the minutes for December 21st. Moved by Mr. Perkins, second by Mr. Forsyth. Any discussion? All in favor, put your hand up or signify by saying aye. Thank you. Next up is our COVID-19 update. We have Dana McGuire and Dr. Andrew Williams. Who would like to go first?
I can start out, please. Thanks, everyone. I'll share my screen. I'm going to start by going over an update of how many cases we have. So as of yesterday, we have just over 4,800 cases with 7 people in the hospital. We have 1,300 or so active cases, meaning that we're currently in isolation, and 2,000 people have been through the isolation process. We've now had 64 deaths in our county since the response started in March. And to put in perspective how many cases we have today as compared to 2 weeks ago, we do have 1,126 more cases than my last report. Here is the curve of the daily cases. You can see increase. We do see kind of a bouncing effect because of how cases are reported. So there are still some labs that do not report into the state system. So some days we have like a lower number, some days we have a higher number. So it's hard for us to see, why that is, but it could be just how those tests come into the system or how we get them to our office. Of note, we had 16 deaths in the county at the start of, or on 12/1. And so now being at 64, we've seen a great rise in the last 2 months. Here is just showing on a weekly basis the cases that we have. And I just point out here that we still have 2 days left in the reporting week. So it does look like we have less this week. Our 2 weeks left. In the last 3 weeks prior to this week, we were just shy of 600 cases, whereas the last 2 weeks of December, we were at about 370. And then the weeks just prior to that, we were at about 270. So we have seen a great increase just since the beginning of the year. And then just to put it by a daily average, it is showing that this week, because we still have 2 more days, that we might be a little bit higher. But you can see for the last 3 weeks, we've been at about like 85 cases per day. And that is like a 76% increase from what we had just before the holidays. I just wanted to note, with the increase of cases that we're seeing here in our state, we have had, there's been a report of 25 cases of the UK strain. So you can see the states in the darker blue have had more shown, more cases of that new strain. And we believe that there's an underreporting of this new strain. So as far as the isolation and quarantine goes, as I mentioned, we have just over 1,300 people who are in hospital due to COVID-19. Over 800 people currently in the active mandatory quarantine. So those are the individuals who have been exposed to someone who has tested positive. And we have seen over 16,000 people now who have either been through isolation or the quarantine process in the county. We often get a lot of questions on how we are handling case investigation and contact tracing in the office. So I just wanted to share with you, as our cases have increased this fall, what we have done to increase the staff. So with regards to case investigations, we have received assistance from New York State from the virtual team. There are about 30 people who help on cases in our county. That doesn't mean we have 30 each day, but they do about 75 cases per day. We have about 13 staff in our department that are case investigators. 2 people are just hired through the state called school specialists. They work on case investigations related to K-12 cases. They also do contact tracing, and they help the schools to help kids get tested if they are symptomatic. We have 1 case investigator who is on site. We have 4 county staff that do not work in our department that help out with case investigation, and they've been with us since the spring. And we are just starting to use a self-investigation form. So we know that we have many cases that we do not or just cannot get to just very quickly, or by the time that someone finds out that they have they may be close to the end or done with the isolation process. This faster process makes sure that we get their information though, and we still send the documentation that they were positive. So if they stayed home, they can give that just to their employer. We, on the case or on the contact tracing side, we also have the virtual team through the state to help us. They have really taken on all of the cases we have, some of the complexities that we see with contact tracing. So our department still handles just individuals who have symptoms, who are test positive and move to needing isolation. Also do all of the workplace exposures. So the state doesn't contact an employer and ask for those lists and do all of those things. And so our department needs to do that. And we are seeing more and more work on that side to call the employers and get all of that information. And we also are required to call anyone where that contact information correct, so that for 2 days, our office or the virtual team has not been able to do them. So those are the types of things with regards to contact tracing that we are just focusing on right now. We have 4 county staff that also do contact tracing. And then, I'm sorry, we have 8, and we have 8 of our own staff just in our department. A lot goes on with the case investigation side. And that's even now that we've started to get into the vaccine plans and trying to get the tracing done. One of the things that's really important with some of the cases that we've been seeing is that it's really important for those who do test positive to make sure they share with their employer that they are just positive, so we can start to get a list from all of those employees. What we do find is some staff members don't know everyone that they work with, and so we do need to go to the employer to find that information. And it's really important that workplaces do let people stay home when they are positive. We will get that documentation, but sometimes that needs to start before we can make all of that contact. So it's just really important that when you find that out, that people are just allowed to stay home. One of the things too now with the state helping us more with case investigation and with contact tracing, sometimes when you're contacted by a local number, but it's by a 518 number because it is that's contacting. So it's just really important that we all try to answer the phone so we can get that information. With regards to vaccine, I think I mentioned 2 weeks ago, we in the North Country work with a hub with all of the counties in the North Country. And we have just started to put a dashboard together. So each county is required to send in information for vaccines that they are providing, whether it's from a hospital, from a pharmacy, or from the local health department. So I'll show you in just a minute. As far as the pods we have been seeing, so besides pharmacies and the hospitals, SUNY Potsdam did open up a week ago. They are expected to see 500 today, and I do believe that Dr. Williams will take you through how that was set up. We did receive, as the local health department, our first shipment of vaccine last week. 209 vaccines. The county jail, and each provider I have listed here really has a specific area that they can vaccinate. So the hospitals, when they do get vaccine, are supposed to focus on the healthcare and the providers in that area. Pharmacies are to focus on those that are 65 and older. And then for us, the local health department, it's really important that we stick to that priority of law enforcement, teachers, all of public safety. So that also includes first responders, bus drivers, courts, and things like that. We can also vaccinate those volunteers who are just helping at the pod site. But we do receive correspondence each week from the governor's office that we are to maintain that. One thing we're working on with the state is to be allowed to do the distribution to those who are 65 years and older. So hopefully that will move forward. And we're trying to, in our department, see how we can set up mobile units so we can go to those kind of individuals, maybe at a high rise or at a senior center, so we can get to them. But right now we are working with the state so that we can also offer it to those populations. That said, the supply is very low. So we only get 200 vaccines so far per week. And so it's really hard. We are planning to get to all of the communities. We'll have a pod site in each one of the regions. But right now, the supply of vaccine, we don't have enough just to go all around the county yet. Here's a picture of the dashboard that the hub is just putting it together. And so you can see in this top gray line, it just shows vaccination by the counties and by the weeks. And I'll move to the next slide. I have it a little bit larger. So this is from data from last Wednesday, actually. And so twice a week, we need to report to the hub on the vaccines that we can see in the system. Local health departments that can see all of the vaccines that are put into the system by the hospitals, by the pharmacies, and by us. I believe we submitted our report this morning. We only had 10,400 vaccines, so that's the and what we did not see yet is those numbers from the SUNY Potsdam site. So we do have a question in on why we're not seeing those yet. So we should have more to be shown because of those, or up to 500 vaccines just per day. In the 10,400 that we did see this morning, there was about 2,100 people who had went to the fairgrounds at the Syracuse site. So if you have a zip code of St. Lawrence County, that's how it's going to be pulled. So that's what we did see just as well. New York State website also has a COVID-19 vaccine tracker, and we're asking questions at this point of how they get this number. So you can see North Country, it shows how many of the first doses that we received, and then how many that we used, and what the percentage is. And I know on Friday we were at 99%. So we're not sure of what part of the week, if they know that they have some that are scheduled to get here and we haven't used yet. So we're trying to get the information of how this kind of number gets to the dashboard. Here in St. Lawrence County, we do work with the pharmacies, all of the hospitals. We talk about who has vaccine, who might not be using it, and so we can try to help to make sure that that happens. We all have standby lists so that we know just how many vaccines we have, who has, and then who we can get in to get vaccinated if for some reason somebody comes and they're not just eligible to get that vaccine that day. Once we get vaccine, we 7 days to use it, and we must use 95% of it, or we can't get a reallocation for the next week. So they do monitor very closely how we use it, and if we're not able to, we do have to share it with partners and go to through a process so that can all be monitored. We know that there are quite a few of the benefits due to getting the vaccine, and the two that we have right now, we know that they're about 95% effective, and it's a really safe way to help build protection. So some people who have had a positive test, there is research to show that you can be for 90 days show a protective response, but this is a much more safer way than maybe just getting the virus because we don't know how it's going to do an effect on each person. And it is an important tool to help us stop the pandemic, but along with all of the other recommendations that we've been talking about. So it's still really important to wear a mask, do social distancing, wash hands, and try to avoid crowds. Like I said, these things along with the vaccine are all really important. And we're still seeing a lot of cases where people are going to work, where they are going out, where they do have symptoms. So it's really important. We just need to watch this so that we can stop this spread as well. One of the things that I found kind of interesting was an article last week. The adherence of non-pharmaceutical strategies. And what has been shown is that people still, from the spring to the fall, there has been an increase of just people going to do like visits with others, going to restaurants, being in close contact with those who are not in their household, and not just staying in as much as they were. The only thing that has shown an increase with regard to a strategy has been mask wearing from the spring to the fall. So it's really important that we do keep all of these guidelines in place. With those guidelines and vaccine, we can hopefully just try to reduce and try to get back to more of what we've seen in the past. That is all I have for this evening. I will stop sharing my screen and I will let Dr. Williams do his presentation. Thank you.
So, good evening. I'm just going to quickly go over national trends to give some perspective. So in the US, in terms of daily new cases, we've actually seen a little bit of a downward trend. We're currently at 190,000 per day. And for deaths, we are, however, between 3,000 and 4,000 deaths per day. So we've had nearly 25 million cases. The average daily cases per 100,000 across the nation is about 52.6, and the total deaths are 416,000. If you look at what's happening in the region, that same measure of new cases per 100,000 residents as a region, which is the 7-county region, we peaked at 84. More recently, we're trending downward at 69. Hopefully this is a trend that continues. If you look at percent positives for tests, we peaked as a region at around 9.2. This has also decreased to about 6.4. As Dana pointed out, these data are different for our county. Unfortunately, we've continued to trend upward. It's just the region has trended downward as a whole. I did want to talk a little bit more about vaccines. So there are two currently available vaccines that have their emergency use approval from the FDA. It's the Moderna vaccine and the Pfizer vaccine. Both of these vaccines require 2 injections, and they're both considered to be about 95% effective. There are 3 COVID vaccines that are right now in phase 3 trials. So that's the third and final portion of their of the research to demonstrate that they're effective and safe. The first 2 are the Johnson & Johnson one and the AstraZeneca vaccines. And the third one is made by a company called Novavax. The Johnson & Johnson and the AstraZeneca one use a benign viral vector to deliver information to the cells to help you develop immunity. The Novavax one uses spike protein nanoparticles. So the current vaccines are messenger RNA. These other 3 vaccines use a different technology. They're also looking like they're going to be effective, but we don't have the final information from their clinical trials yet. As far as a safety update, I think it's important for people to realize that as of this evening, approximately 22 million doses have been administered just in the US. The CDC has a monitoring program called V-Safe, and so far, no significant safety signal has been reported at this time. And typically, if there is an issue with safety for vaccines once they've been released, you start seeing that after 30 days, and we're well into that period. We're beyond that period. As far as common effects, which people call reactogenicity, and this is really just a sign that your immune system is working. Many people develop a sore arm, joint aches, muscle aches, fevers, chills, kind of flu-like symptoms. It tends to be more common in younger individuals. So our 75 and older crowd tends not to get these symptoms as frequently. And if they get them, they tend to be less severe. As a rule, these symptoms are mild to moderate in severity. They usually don't last any longer than 1 to 3 days. And these effects are treatable with NSAIDs, so that's things like ibuprofen or naproxen, and also acetaminophen. And as I've said before, those should not be taken before vaccination, but if people develop these symptoms after vaccination and they're able to take these medications safely, that's the time to take them. As far as anaphylaxis, which is the most concerning reaction associated with these vaccines, there's now data looking at about 2 million of the Pfizer vaccinations and about 4 million of the Moderna vaccinations. And the rate of this reaction is between 2.5 and 10 cases per 1 million vaccines administered. The majority of these reactions do occur within the 15-minute period. A few of them occur within the 30-minute period after injection, which is why we monitor people after they're given the shot. All of these cases were successfully treated. And so really, again, the bottom line is that vaccination is safer than COVID infection. As far as vaccinations on a national level, again, almost 22 million doses administered. If you look at how these have been administered across the US, you see that in New York, it's about 1.3 million doses. Now, this information changes on a daily basis, but somewhere around 6,500 per 100,000 residents. The goal of the distribution program is for there to be equitable distribution that's also clinically driven. And the standards and the things that are being prioritized are looking for people who are at either higher risk of exposure to the coronavirus, and also to look at people who are at greater risk of severe illness or poor outcome. So when Dana reviews the priority level 1A and 1B, it's really factoring in those 2 considerations. So who's most likely to be exposed to the virus and needs to be protected, and who's most likely to have a poor outcome should they become infected. The challenge in New York, as with other states, is that if you combine the number of people who are eligible in group 1A and 1B, it's nearly 7 million New Yorkers. If you look at how vaccines being distributed, and this is not unique to New York State, we're receiving between 160,000 and 250,000 per week. Fortunately, you can see there's a slight upward trend. but there are calculations about how long it would take to vaccinate 7 million people, and it's certainly a number of weeks and months. So as Dana mentioned, for phase 1A across the county, really we relied on the hospital system, St. Lawrence Health System, Clifton Fine, Claxon Hepburn, to vaccinate the healthcare providers who made up a large portion of 1A, and the pharmacies did the long-term care facilities. As far as 1B, the New York State Vaccination Center at SUNY Potsdam and Maxey Hall, the county pods, which again are going to be a partnership with some assistance from the hospital systems, pharmacies, and a lot of assistance from the Medical Reserve Corps of volunteers. And then the Community Health Center will also be participating in 1B. If you look at the state site, so New York State is sponsoring a mass vaccination center. It's located at SUNY Potsdam at Maxey Hall. It's a partnership though, so it's New York State is operating it, but St. Lawrence Health System is providing quite a few of the clinical staff, pharmacy support, and helping with vaccine storage. SUNY Potsdam, of course, is providing the venue and security, and St. Lawrence County and the National Guard are providing logistical support. As far as capacity, it's designed to be able to do more than 1,000 vaccinations per day. The initial startup is 500 vaccinations per day. Then as those people need to come back for their second shot, it'll ramp up to 1,000. Honestly, it could do more if we had more vaccine. It's a great space. It's COVID safe. So it's very large. For those of you who haven't been there, it's very well ventilated. And everyone is enforcing masking, physical distancing, and hand hygiene. So if anyone has any concerns about the safety from a COVID perspective, it's a very safe environment. It's also accessible both in terms of hours. So it's 7 days a week and it's 12 hours per day. And I'm going to talk briefly about mobility assistance. As far as the vaccines that are being administered, for now and likely for the future, it's going to be the Pfizer vaccine. That may change, but that is the vaccine that's being administered. The eligibility groups are currently 1A and 1B. But I really want to emphasize that even though the site is in our county and in the village of Potsdam, it's a regional site. And so the purpose of these state sites, and there's right now only 2 in the North Country region, is for people throughout the region. And it's actually open to anyone in New York State. So it's fortunate that it's in our county, but it's very much a regional site. Appointments are required. And if somebody were to walk in, it's not allowed and they would be turned away. So people should schedule. As far as how to schedule, there's a website, a New York State Am I Eligible website. That's one option. And then the other option is there's a telephone hotline. A big question that comes up and that came up a number of times during my day today is, is this accessible? We're really trying to make sure some of our elderly community members, people with lots of medical illnesses, are safely able to, get into the building and have the vaccine. And so the National Guard is on site and they're ready and able to provide assistance. So if somebody has an elderly relative or if they're elderly and need assistance, they basically just pull up their signs with that phone number. They call that number and folks from the National Guard will come out. There's plenty of wheelchairs and really can get people right in. And this does bring up an important topic. So as we're talking about equity, we need to acknowledge that there are certain challenges to getting the vaccine to the people that should get the vaccine in 1A and 1B. I think a big challenge anytime you roll out a vaccine program, especially to some of our seniors, some are better at using their iPads and their iPhones than I am, but some find computer access a challenge. So there is a telephone hotline. I should acknowledge that both the computer site and the telephone hotline during the very first several days, if not weeks, were really a challenge. From what I understand and from my own experience, both the telephone hotline and the computer access is much, much better than it was at the outset. So if somebody got frustrated, they should try again. The Office of the Aging through the county is also offering navigation. And by that, I mean that if somebody really doesn't want to use the hotline or can't use the telephone hotline, they can call the county, and folks at the Office of the Aging will help people navigate the website, and will really do it step by step and get people the appointments that they want. As far as transportation, I think our goal as a county is to have geographically dispersed pods. So the state site is great. We can do a lot of vaccine, but for some people, it's just not feasible to travel from Messina or Governor. It's too much of a burden. So one of our goals is to really have geographically dispersed points of distribution. That's very dependent on getting more vaccine from the state. As soon as we have that, that's top on the list for Dana and her crew to make happen. The other thing is there's work to get the county bus to provide transportation to the state site, and I presume to the other pods when they open. And for the frail elderly, as Dana mentioned, one of our goals, certainly once we have more vaccine and once the county is enabled to vaccinate the older crew, the idea would be we would identify locations such as some of the high-rise buildings in the different villages and towns, and then have a vaccine clinic on site so that people really wouldn't have to travel, far out of their living environment. So as Dana mentioned, for the county, we've done more than 7,000 vaccines. And again, this is data from yesterday, so it's undoubtedly more. Our eligible population, so that we're excluding the people under the age of 16 because they're not eligible for this vaccine, our total eligible population would be 89,000. That's not the number of people in 1A and 1B. That's the people in 1A through phase 5, but would be about 90,000. And right now our vaccination rate is 8%, which if you look nationally is quite good. If you look at the age distribution, it's kind of like a bell curve. And what you see is the first arrows is you're between 30 and 69. That's the bulk of the people that we vaccinated. And that's probably because a lot of 1A healthcare providers fall in that category. And a large number of the 1B folks also fall in that category. But it's this group to the right, the 70 to 80 plus group, that I think from a public health perspective, we really want to start emphasizing. We really want to do everything we can to get vaccine to those individuals, because as we've talked about week after week, those are the folks who are most likely to have a bad outcome should they develop COVID. I do want to just mention the COVID variants because this is a real concern and in the news. So in the US right now, we do have the UK variant, which is called the B.1.1.7. There are two other variants that are, at least as of this afternoon, not yet isolated in the US. So there's a South African variant and the Brazilian variant. And as far as the UK variant, we know that it's more contagious. In Great Britain, they just released some information suggesting that it might actually be more deadly. I think the jury is out on whether it's more deadly or not, but that has certainly made people pay attention. As far as the UK variant being in New York State, there are at least 25 cases. But as Dana alluded to, it's actually, there are mechanisms to monitor for this. But anyone who gets an antigen test, anyone who gets a rapid PCR test, we're not able to tell whether they have the variant or not. We can tell that they're positive, but we don't know whether it's from the variant. So if you've got 25 cases, you can assume that you should by an order of 10 or more. As far as vaccine effectiveness, when the UK variant was first identified, expert opinion was that the vaccines would work. There is now actual scientific research demonstrating that the antibodies produced from vaccination are effective against the UK variant. However, for the South African variant, it looks like the antibodies produced from vaccine are effective, but the effectiveness is diminished. So we already have, like Moderna is talking about creating a booster to address some of these changes with the variants. And I want to be clear because I don't want people to be concerned about getting the Moderna vaccine right now. So one still needs to get the initial Moderna vaccination and the initial booster, this would potentially be a third vaccination down the road that people would be offered if the South African variant does indeed turn out to be something that's a problem for the US. So this is not a reason to delay getting vaccinated. If anything, it's a reason to go get vaccinated as soon as you're eligible. So that's it for my presentation. I'm sure Dana and I are willing to answer questions.
Does anyone have any questions for Dr. Williams or Dana? Mrs. Haggard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Williams, I had a constituent contact me and ask me about the seemingly high number in Potsdam. Do you have knowledge or an opinion that might have some science behind it about why we are such an outlier right now?
I'll see if Dana wants to say anything. I mean, what we tend to see is there's essentially, there's community-wide spread, but you still get clusters that develop. So oftentimes, again, it's not, if a workplace is using PPE appropriately, we rarely see transmission at the workplace. But what we see is that one individual, and sometimes it's a younger person, a student or somebody, comes home. If they're in a large household or a multi-generational household, sometimes one case, turns into 10. And then if there's communication between that family and another family in terms of transmission, it can very rapidly turn into an outbreak within an outbreak. And I imagine that explains what's happening in Potsdam.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Arquette.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if I'm clear, anybody that approaches us that's looking for the vaccination, whether they're in the phase that's currently being looked at right now, should still call Potsdam State for an appointment. Is that correct?
Well, what people should do is if they have a question about whether they're eligible or not. I mean, I think a lot of people are aware, who's in 1A because they've been communicated to by their employer. For 1B, Dana had presented a slide before listing who's eligible. People have questions about whether they're eligible or not. They can go to the website. It actually prompts you with different questions. And at the end of that first screen, it'll tell you whether you're eligible or not. If you're not eligible, you sort of stop there. But if you are eligible, it then brings you to an opportunity to schedule an appointment. And just to be clear, you shouldn't call SUNY Potsdam. You should go to the website or call the hotline, which I listed, which is also listed elsewhere. If somebody does have difficulty with either the hotline or the online version, and especially if they're in the older age group, we would encourage them to call the Office of the Aging, and again, they can help with navigation.
If I could just follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Tony.
Yes, the reason, I guess, for my question was I had a couple individuals that weren't within the boundaries of the current phase that had been notified by their employer, and their employer's question was, if you had the opportunity to take the vaccine, would you do that? And the reasoning was because with certain people not making their appointments, apparently there was opportunity for folks that weren't within the boundaries of the phase. So I guess I was looking for some clarification on that potential.
Well, one of the things that's happening is, as with any clinic that's scheduled 500 people, there are people who are unable to, essentially make their appointment. So the state and the health system have a system where there's a standby list of people. It's a standby list of people who are eligible for vaccination, either because of employment or because of age. It should be people who are in 1A or 1B. For instance, it was like the state troopers or the sheriff's office. They're on a standby list. And if somebody doesn't show up and there's vaccine that's not spoken for toward the end of the day, the site basically contacts people who are on that standby list who are eligible. So that's the plan of what's happening.
Okay, Mr. Fay. You're muted, Dan.
I'm sorry, doctor. This is where I was asking. Canton is a facility that used to be a craft plant. At the present time, they're making boxes and cleaning boxes for basically the cheese industry. I was approached by them and saying, is there any way their priority can be moved up? Because if they have an outbreak at the facility, they have to close down. He believes in Vermont and in Canada and New York State, they're going to be dumping milk. He thought they should be moved up as priority. And I had no answer for him. I don't think it can be moved up anyway. Is there any way that we can move up a group in the priorities? As teachers originally weren't in that second group, I don't believe, and they're in it now.
So the priorities are, they're established actually in principle by the CDC, and then each state has made some modifications and made more granular recommendation about, who's truly in 1B. It's very much in the control of the state government and very much not in the control of the county government, which is tough because we know as local people that there's certain people who really are very essential to like the North Country economy, where that same profession may have a different significance in a different part of the state. Be that as it may,
So you're saying there's nothing
it's very
we
much
can do?
dictated by the state.
Excuse me, Diana. Are you
Right
saying
now,
there's
I would
probably
say
nothing
that
we can do?
As a county, there's nothing we can do except it does seem that some of these groups have advocated as groups, and there in the past had been some slight modification, especially with 1A. 1B has been pretty static, like there's not been a lot of change in 1B. So I think what we can do is get 1B done as efficiently as possible so that we can move on to 1C.
Thank you.
Ms. Curran.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Dr. Williams, I know you and I had discussed the other day when I was filling out like my 50th millionth form online with my patients, that some of the questions are ambiguous. One of the questions is, are you a frontline, like cash register or grocery person? Well, that technically, if you are at the cash register all day, every day, even if you don't work at groceries and you click yes, then it says to you, do you work for the government? So that kind of covers the frontline postal people that everybody's in and out of their office. They're allowing them to get vaccinated under 1B, but it's not clear as you're going down through that form, who's actually like that you would actually be eligible, because until you push that you're frontline, like cash register person, it doesn't ask you whether or not you work for the post office.
Dean, I don't know if you want to comment on that.
We are receiving a lot of questions. We do receive notices from the governor's office on a regular basis, really telling us who to focus on. And so they're specific in that it's sheriff's office, it's the police departments, it's first responders, it's courts, it's bus drivers, it's grocery store workers. So that's what we have to go on. And all we know is that the importance of prioritization is we have to give to who is listed so that we can get our next allocation. But we do have a person to ask questions to. So I can ask about postal workers, but we have not heard that yet.
Well, when you go down through, it kind of opens it up. But also I would think if you're waiting cash register at Price Chopper versus Home Depot, there's no difference. Like you're right there. So I just didn't know if maybe we could get clarification in that, and if there's any little sheet. That's all. Thank you.
One thing I probably didn't make terribly clear is that, hopefully if the 3rd, 4th, and 5th vaccines are approved and distributed, a lot of this priority levels can be opened up and we can really speed through the 1B, get to the 1C, because it's really an awful feeling, I think, for everybody who's doing the vaccination to not be able to vaccinate anybody who wants to be vaccinated. So, in case people didn't realize this, people on the vaccinating end would love to vaccinate every single person who wanted to be vaccinated. And it's really tough to turn people away who are, working hard, whatever they're doing, they're working hard and doing their best. We'd love to be able to vaccinate them just as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? I think that's it. Thank you, Dr. Williams and Dr. McGuire. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So we'll move on to our resolutions on highway. First one is authorizing the chair to sign a contract with New York Power Authority for the installation of a culvert on County Route 39 to facilitate the Smart Path Moses Adirondack Transmission Lines project and modifying the 21 budget for the Department of Highways. Moved by Mr. Forsythe, second by Mr. Denisha and Mr. Smithers. Mr. Chambers.
Yes, thank you. This resolution, or a variant of it, we discussed last year and then tabled and then totally pulled. But this resolution will allow us to sign a contract with NYPA for culvert installation on County Road 39 for wildlife passage.
Mr. Arquette.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to abstain from this voter discussion due to my primary employment.
Ms. Terminelli.
I also need to recuse myself from this vote.
Okay. Anyone else? All those in favor of the resolution signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried.
Thank you.
Next resolution is modifying the 2020 budget for the Department of Highways for overtime, equipment repair, and maintenance. Moved by Mr. Burke, second by Ms. Curran and Mr. Arquette. Mr. Chambers.
Yes, this resolution modifies the 2020 budget for repairs for other departments' vehicles at the Department of Highways, and also increases overtime in the engineering division, basically due to the large amount of projects that we had, federal aid projects that we had this past year. Some overtime was necessary. For example, one of the projects was located in Wanakina, which required quite a bit of travel time.
Okay, anyone else? Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried. Thanks,
Thank
Mr. Denise pointed out, I skipped one, I grabbed the 2 pages together, so let's go back. This resolution is authorizing the chair to sign a contract with the United States Department of Agricultural, Animal, and Plant Health Inspection Service, Wildlife Services for the Intergovernmental Cooperative Program. Moved by Mr. Denisha, second by Mr. Perkins and Mr. Smithers. Mr. Chambers.
Yes, thank you. This resolution allows us to sign this contract with the USDA for wildlife removal, such as beaver, plugging culverts, or other infrastructure issues at the county highway. The USDA files, gets the permits, files all the paperwork, and works directly with the New York State DEC to obtain permits, and works directly with highway crews to address these issues that are causing damage to our infrastructure.
Any questions for Mr. Chambers concerning these beavers? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried.
Thank
Next
you.
up, we have discussion from Mr. Chambers about our outpost facilities. Mr. Chambers.
Yes, thank you. Last year, the board approved the Department of Highways to hire an architectural firm to work on the design of salt storage and equipment garages within the county. And the estimate, which I'd like to keep as confidential at this point, due to the fact that we aren't ready to go to bid or anything. I'd like to keep that confidential, but it is available to the legislators on Google Drive. If I could ask Mr. Soper to share some slides, and I'll start going over those if I could. The first slide is a slide of our inside our current garage, and mentions the locations of the 3 outposts, Lisbon, Russell, and Potsdam. Currently, we do have facilities at Russell and Potsdam, but the Lisbon site on County Road 28A is proposed next to the solid waste transfer station. If you could go to the next slide. The red arrows on the map indicate the locations of the proposed sites. Again, the Russell on County Road site on Russell, County Road 24, just outside of Russell. The Potsdam site, which is co-located with the town of Potsdam, just inside the village where 345 would start, near La Valley Trucking and the SPCA. And the third, just outside of Ogdensburg, in the town of Lisbon on County Road 28A, next to the solid waste transfer station. Next slide, please. This first slide, this slide actually shows the proposed station in Ogdensburg. The existing road that you see coming off 28A goes to the new emergency services communication tower. And the rectangular box on the left-hand side would be proposed sand salt storage, and the rectangular structure to the right of that would be the proposed truck storage. The other rectangular box with lines in it, above that is our proposed septic system. If you could go to the next slide, please. This diagram is overlaid aerial photography of our current Russell Outpost area. The facility stores the sand salt outside on an asphalt pad. That would be proposed to be put into that rectangular area, which toward the bottom right-hand side of the plan would be, as I said, the salt storage facility. And then the overlay rectangular shape over the existing buildings and where some of the automobiles are located would be the truck storage facility. The proposed septic system would be running parallel with the County Road 24. Next slide, please. This slide it shows the proposed location at co-locating with the town of Potsdam. At the right-hand side, it's kind of is the SPCA, bottom right. To the left are the town of Potsdam existing facilities, and the county has a small building up near the roadway, the current shack that we use for meeting area for our employees, and all the other, the equipment, trucks and loaders are stored outside. The rectangular shape that's shown in the center of the diagram is the proposed truck storage facility. and the other rectangular in the center of the diagram next to a center top is next to a small salt storage that we share with Potsdam. And the proposed salt storage is located right to the left of that. All of these facilities are designed exactly, nearly exactly the same. Some of them are mirror imaged, but the footprint on all the facilities are exactly the same. Next slide, please. This drawing shows the floor plan of the proposed garage, 6-bedroom garage with a office, break area, 2 restrooms, a locker room, and a utility area on the left-hand side of the screen. Above that would be a mezzanine for a light storage. And the line down the center is, of the flooring is a trench drain that would collect water or what have you from the vehicles when they melt off, the snow melts off and such. This is a metal, proposed to be a metal sided building with a metal clad interior, very utilitarian type design to the structure. Next slide, please. Oh, so anyway, if I could, I'm sorry. Thank you. That's good there. The salt storage facilities are proposed to be 60 by 110 feet, and the truck storage are proposed to be 60 by 140. The Potsdam location, we would need to work out an agreement with the town of Potsdam to utilize the property. And the other 2 locations, 28 on 28A in Lisbon and the Russell site, are currently properties owned by St. Lawrence County. The main, just so you know, the board understands, you know, the Potsdam facility, again, that currently all the equipment's outside. The diesel trucks are plugged in, so they'll start. But it's still very rough on equipment and the manpower there. We do not have running water in that shack, and we utilize porta-johns for employees. One of the primary objectives is to the environment with the covering of the sand and salt mixture, and also providing collection of any runoff of any materials off the vehicles. So they are proposed to be heated garages, so any of the oils or water or whatever would be collected and treated and disposed of. Those drains would, the only one that's on public sewer is in Potsdam. The others would be on a closed collection system that would be treated off-site. We currently do have leachate tankers at solid waste to haul leachate, and my plan would be to haul any of the contaminated water collected from the drain to the nearest wastewater treatment facility. The diesel trucks and equipment of modern day have diesel exhaust fluid, which is a urea-based product, water and urea, basically. And that product does freeze. So when the trucks are outside, the emission systems do not work properly. And until the urea is warmed and brought up to speed, but it does create significant maintenance issues with storing this diesel equipment outside. So from an environmental standpoint, I think it's important that we have facilities to store our equipment and our road chemicals. I believe it's important for our employees to provide them a clean and safe work environment.
Thank you, Mr. Chambers. Any questions or comments concerning this? Mrs. Haggard?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chambers, thank you for your presentation about this. The facility there on Outer Pine Street, isn't it? Pine Street, yeah.
Yes.
Is that, it's next to the animal shelter. Is that still in the village or is that just outside the village? Is it in the town and village or is it just in the town?
It's just within the village, but it's a town facility.
Okay, okay. I thought that was still in the village limits.
Yes, it is, but it's owned by but the property is owned by the town.
Because those trees were cleared several years ago with, I guess with this in mind. I thought something was, it's right across from Lone Valley, right?
It from La Valley Trucking, yes, right across from that. Yep.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Mr. Denisha?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Our mics aren't working.
Okay. Mr. Chambers, I thought this was I thought it was a good project when we first discussed it. I still think it's a good project. I think going with the three cookie cutters, if you will, we can capture some economy of scale from the engineering aspect. As far as I know there's no mechanicals yet. I'm wondering in regards to heat. Are you looking at inflow or radiant heat?
Yes, actually, inflow radiant heat, and then also tied to the boiler system would be some overhead heating units for recovery after the garage doors are opened. So you'd need that to supplement to warm the building back up, but radiant floor heating would be primary.
Very good, thank you.
Anyone else? So this would, Mr. Chambers, this would definitely drastically change the traffic flow in the town of Canton, or in the village here at Canton. Would there be sand and salt still stored at that facility? Will be operating functioning trucks out of there, or will it be a repair site?
Well, the repair site is still going to be, that's the, still plans to be the repair area. And the routes out of there will be greatly diminished. Instead of running from Canton, they'll be running primarily out of the Lisbon site. I do plan to have 2 runs, truck runs going out of the Canton facility. One being a state route, which uses straight salt currently, and then a county run that would be going toward more of in a southerly direction out of Canton. But the operations would be greatly diminished, and I plan to keep the road materials within the small storage areas that we currently have, rather than having an outside mound of sand and salt at Canton. So traffic would be diminished significantly, and my plan is to eliminate the pile.
And would those 2 trucks have to remain outside, or would you bring them in? Those 2 truck runs?
Yeah, the plan would be to bring those into the maintenance shop when they're not running the routes.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Haggard has another question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chambers, I was talking with our village administrator. it requires a special kind of floor in those kind of buildings to store salt. Is that correct? Something that the salt doesn't eat through, or?
We are planning on, yes, we are planning on using an asphalt flooring, using like a concrete floor with a reinforcement would tend to rust and break, the rebar in it would rust and break up the concrete. So the standard practice is to put an asphalt, like road paving material in for the flooring.
Okay, thank you very much.
Would anyone else like to comment? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Chambers. Oh, wait, Mr. Terminelli, I'm sorry.
Just a question. Has there been any consideration given to heating using solar rooftop panels in the heated buildings at least?
That is something that we did discuss with our architect, but may be added at a later time, and look for grant funds if they become available.
Mr. Forsythe.
Don, what about fueling stations? Will there be fuel on site of each three?
Yeah, yes, if I can, a little different for each one. Currently, right now, the county at the Potsdam location has a diesel tank right in conjunction with the town of Potsdam's. So there is an existing diesel tank there. We plan to just continue to use that. And we'd use that current driveway that the town of Potsdam uses right now. So the trucks would drive out and around and exit onto 345 Pine Street in the exact same location. At the Lisbon site, which is currently, not a facility at all, we would be putting in a diesel fuel tank there. And then at the Russell site, we already do have a diesel tank, and we would be reusing that tank if possible.
Okay.
Anyone else? Just the only comment I would make is that I'm sure you've discussed this with the engineers. I have a heated shop with radiant with 3 overhead doors. The recovery is almost immediate. We entertain the idea of overhead heaters also. We found that they weren't necessary, but it may be different in that size of building with all 6 doors open at the same time. So thank you very much, Mr. Chambers.
Thank you. I appreciate the time, the board's time in considering this proposal.
Okay. Okay, next up is real property with Mr. Green, and the resolution is authorizing real property tax law correction of errors. Moved by Mr. Perkins, second by Mr. Berg. Go ahead, Mr. Green.
Okay, yes, good evening. This resolution is correcting 3 errors on the town and county tax bills. The reason that we come before you is that each of these errors are over $2,500 each. So we need to ask for approval in order to reduce these bills. And again, with your approval, these bills are then, the assessed values are lowered, recalculated, and the bills are then mailed back out. If you remember last month, I came before the board for the annual approval for tax bills that are less than $2,500 each, and we are able to correct those. So this one is for one that's a tax bill that's in excess of $2,500.
Any questions for Mr. Green? How does this happen? Their local assessor messed up or what there, Bruce?
Well, in this particular case, there was an assessment change on like the first one where an exemption was calculated incorrectly. So once it was discovered, it had to be back looked at and reduced that way. Again, most times it has to do with an exemption that either got missed or something to that effect.
Okay, and is this 1 year total or is this multiple years?
The second and third one is for 2 separate years.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So any more questions for Mr. Green? Seeing none, all those in favor of the resolution signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Green.
Thank you.
Next up is our treasurer, Renee Cole, and the resolution is modifying the 2020 budget for the treasurer's office for additional sales tax distribution. Moved by Mr. Perkins, second by Mr. Forsyth and Ms. Curran. Renee?
Thank you. Good evening. So this resolution is it's similar to one I've been lucky enough, I guess, to bring you for the last couple of years. I think this might be the 4th year in a row that our sales tax revenue has exceeded our budget. Because we share the revenues with the municipalities, we also exceeded our budgeted expense for sales tax distribution. So this resolution addresses that and will allow us to distribute the additional monies at the end of the 4th quarter, which is February. I think next Monday we intend to send the checks out.
Okay.
I apologize.
Any questions for our county treasurer? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Lightfoot.
If I may, I have a question or a couple of questions for the county treasurer.
Renee, can you stay with us? There she did. Okay.
I'm on.
Mr. Lightfoot.
Okay. First off, I'd like to commend you for getting this resolution out as quick as you did. I'm sure that the towns and villages in the city can put that extra money they're going to receive to good use. I have a question regarding a topic that has been brought up before, not only by you, but by one of the city of Ogdensburg folks. I believe it was Mr. Jelly. And he at one time mentioned that the city owed the county, I think the figure he used was over $800,000. I'm wondering if you could put a finer point on what that money is, why it is that they owe us that much money, and what kind of money is it? Is it money that we overpaid them, that it was money collected from property tax, or the source of it? And over what period of time that amount of money was collected?
Okay. So that was quite a few questions, but I'll take a stab at it.
All right.
No, there is a large balance due from the city of Ogdensburg. And my office has reached out and made contact with them about that. The balance due as of today is $825,000 and a little bit of change. That represents taxes, property taxes, that have been unpaid. The old year, we have a spreadsheet that tracks it. It's 2003, the balance. There's a few years that everything was made whole, and then it looks like from 13 through 19, you know, they didn't make us whole on those balances as well. So those total $825,000.
If I may.
Yep.
Does the city agree with that amount, or is there any disagreement on their part with the, that amount of money?
No, in late December, I had a short Zoom meeting with their city manager, Mr. Jelly, regarding this. He was just looking to get a little bit more information about it, whatever the county had, because it predates him as well as myself. We don't have a ton of information about the balances, other than the fact that ours agrees with the liability that the city holds on their books, I mean, to the dollar. So that's basically what we discussed. I think it was the end of December. And I pointed out that the city carries the liability, so it's not going to be a surprise for them. It's just that they haven't made us whole on it. So after that discussion, he reached out to me about a week later and to let me know, he emailed me that we would be receiving the balance for 2020 at the time. And we did receive that about a week after the email. We received that on January 12th. So 2020 is fully paid.
If I may?
Sure.
Chairman?
Yes, please. Yep.
Has there been any conversation with the city officials as to when this money might be repaid or received by the county?
At the time when Mr. Jelly indicated that they would be sending us the payment for the $336,000 that was owed for 2020, he indicated, and that was the purpose actually of the meeting at the end of December. The short meeting was he wanted to get that information together in order to bring it to his council. So my understanding is that he was preparing to go to council, but I have not heard anything since that time.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. Any questions? So I have one. You mentioned that this debt is from 2003. How come we're just learning about this now? I mean, this would be under previous county treasurer, Bob McNeil and Kevin Felt. And so we're talking in the latter years here also. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I can't speak for, prior treasurers and what rationale there was for why things weren't paid. I've been kind of told it was sort of an honor system that they would make good on it. It came to my attention, honestly, it was summer, not the summer before that, when we started to do some digging in it to try to get to the bottom of it with the controller. And we kind of didn't get anywhere. And then this year he left. So, it's standing where it is. I think that I brought this, to some of the board members in the context of sales tax discussions, just to point it out because I had recently discovered it myself. The receivable is carried with all of the receivables. So if you recall, the county made towns and villages whole on all of their taxes, and we carry anywhere from $9 to $11 million a year in unpaid taxes. This is just one piece of that $10 million number. So it doesn't stand out by itself until you get digging into the smaller details.
Okay.
So we're addressing it now.
Okay. Mr. Arquette.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Renee, so there's not a mechanism where, as for all of these years, as we were reimbursing or making Ogdensburg, giving them their portion of sales tax distribution, that we wouldn't have the opportunity to pull that money back?
I'm not aware that exists. And if it was, it would definitely be something we'd have to go through. I'd want to make sure with the county attorney and the board, I think would have to take action on that. I don't think that would be a decision for me to make to withhold from their sales tax. And I'm not certain, honestly, if that's even a viable option.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We do have the county attorney's photo has just showed up. Mr. Button, would you care to comment?
Just to touch on what Legislator Arquette asked, we do have several options, Legislator Arquette, but preferably because some of them may entail litigation, it's most likely a good idea to discuss those items in executive session.
Good. Okay. Mr. Arquette, did you have another question? No. Okay. Mr. Berg.
Renee, are there any other municipalities that are in similar situations with the county?
So as far as property taxes, the city's unique.
Right.
We for towns and villages and school districts make everybody whole. Mm-hmm. The city of Ogdensburg actually is given our warrant and collects ours with their city taxes. So it's the opposite. end of the spectrum for that. So no, the answer is no. The towns pay themselves actually, and then they give us what's left. So what's left is always short of what we build. That's part of that $10 million number that exists until we're able to foreclose, you know, and go down that path. It represents, that $10 million number also represents, you know, some big environmental properties out there. There's some other numbers that are in there, but those are all the town village taxes and the city balance of 825,000.
Well, I guess, Renee, my question was a little broader than that. In any other category, not just property taxes.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other large sums of money that are owed to the county?
From the municipalities?
Yes.
Not that I'm aware of, not off the top of my head that I can think about.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. All right, any other discussion? We'll move on to the next resolution. So next up is social services with Cindy Ackerman. And the resolution is modifying the 2020 budget for social services for foster care, safety net, and HEAP. Moved by Mr. Forsythe, second by Mr. Perkins. Ms. Ackerman?
Good evening, everyone. So again, we are modifying our 2020 budget for the increased cost of foster care and adoptive services. And that is our additional HEAP expenses. We've been doing a lot of renovation with HEAP funds that we have had left over in the budget. So we're just moving some more money into that as we've kind of finished through that process. And it looks fantastic if anybody would like to come over and see it. So we also have at this point with this budget modification, kind of cleaned out our safety net. So up until this point, we've been able to kind of balance the cost of the increase of the kids in care, you know, through these budget modifications. So I think, you know, due to that and due to the trickle effect of the kids in care, you know, with the increased transportation and increased, you know, responsibilities of the staff, you know, due to court orders, I think that we've, you know, actually done a pretty good job to this point at trying to weigh out any of the fundings that we have able to reappropriate.
Okay, any questions for Ms. Ackerman?
Just a comment.
Mr. Denisha would like to make a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's in regards to HEAP, in regards to rehabilitation of homes. You know, I know Cynthia, this is not directed at you, but I know you're familiar with this.
Mm-hmm.
We have a lot of folks in St. Lawrence County that are living in substandard housing. And a lot of the substandard housing, a lot of it are mobile homes. Obviously, HUD dollars, from what I understand, cannot be used for rehabilitation for mobile homes. There are also a number of folks in St. Lawrence County, and I know of a few that are heating their homes with space heaters, with the ovens in their kitchens. You know, I find this unacceptable, and I know it's not your problem. I know you're working, you're trying to do things, but you know, we've got people that they're trying to keep their houses warm. They're risking fire. They're risking their lives. And they don't have any options.
Agreed. You know, I've been having some ongoing discussions and some outreach trying to find out. We've had quite a few people that have applied, you know, for HEAP or different things like that. And, you know, to make a long story short, some of these people just don't qualify for the program, which is unfortunate, which does put them in a position where, you know, they could be in danger because they are using heating resources that, you know, are not appropriate by any means. So another issue we've been having is we've had, a lot of repairs kind of on the books, and it's been really hard for people, to get out there and make some of these repairs, but we are catching up with some of those. We actually had, I think, a couple of repairmen that, ended up out on medical leave or different things like that because of situations that unexpectedly had occurred. But I do understand your concern with, families that are using their, stoves to heat and unsafe devices, especially, in small, either apartments or mobile homes. So we're trying to meet to see if there's, other resources out there, based on people's, eligibility. If they're not eligible for HEAP, I'm not sure if they would even be eligible for other types of services like that. But, it seems like in the end, there would be some way, shape or form that would be able to, either come in and do an assessment, look at things and see if there's alternative ways. Maybe something isn't as expensive to fix as one might think it is, to at least get these people living in a safer situation, not only for themselves, but a lot of these, people have families and young children as well.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Mr. Reagan.
Cynthia, is there any way that the county could, with the assistance of the planning office, talk to CDP and North Country Housing Council and look at whether or not there's any way to bring together these agencies, either to seek funding to address some of these problems or to share information among themselves to prioritize the households who are spending the most money on these unsafe heating practices. Because it would seem that in many cases, I remember years ago running across an individual who was living in a school bus and heating the bus with a wood stove. And he was using up so much wood that social services fraud investigators thought he was selling his the wood that the county was buying for him. And then when they actually went and found that he was living in a school bus and heating it with a wood stove, they got together and found a way to help him insulate his school bus in order to make it safer and reduce the scope of the problem.
Yeah, sure. That's actually an avenue that we discussed last week, and one of the staff are going to follow up on that, but I can follow up with them. Another thing that we have been doing too is making sure that any payments that are going, towards fuel or any other type of heat source is going, straight to the vendor, and the funds aren't going to the families, with the understanding that they will pay the vendor, because we want to make sure that it's going straight there so that they are getting the services that we are, assuming that they are getting. So we are probably almost about 80 to 90% doing that now at this point, and trying not to have any, money flowing through the families to the vendor. So that's been a positive move for the department.
Okay.
But I definitely will follow up just to see where we are with that, because that definitely was part of our discussion last week in trying to help these families.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Ackerman. Anyone else? Okay, so that ends the discussion on that. All those in favor of the resolution signify.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried up. Legislator Burke, would you like to bring forth your resolution, please?
Sure. I offer a resolution calling upon the state of New York to provide relief to individual investors of rental property impacted by reduced rent collections due to the COVID-19 pandemic, eviction restrictions, and the eviction moratorium.
So moved by Mr. Burke. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Forsyth and Ms. Curran and Mr. Sheraton. Okay.
If I
Mr.
could speak to
Lightfoot.
it.
Oh, yes, go ahead, Mr. Burke.
Well, our state has instituted rent relief for people whose livelihood has been impacted by COVID. There are, however, individuals who are not covered by the rent relief or who have not pursued rent relief and therefore have not paid their landlords. This has placed an undue burden upon landlords, some landlords, who must shoulder the burden of non-payment. And by no means are we critical of protecting vulnerable people. The reason for this is to ask the state that to put the funding where the funding needs to be and not victimize another group of our citizens, our landlords, while at the same time protecting those that need to be protected from eviction.
Okay, Mr. Lightfoot.
I'd like to be added as a co-sponsor, and I'd like to say that I agree very much with this resolution. These property owners still have to pay their taxes. They have to maintain their buildings and property. They have to, in some cases, provide that heat, that warmth, that is a part of what their renters pay in their taxes. So, in their rent money. I think it's very important that we advocate for something that will provide some relief to those people. It could do more than just cause the financial harm that it is already causing, but it could cause other issues down the road with respect to safety for those people that are occupying those rental units. So I am very much in favor of this, and I certainly would encourage my fellow legislators to consider voting in favor of it.
Mr. Fay.
I'm going to have to abstain because of personal, family, and corporate conflict.
Mrs. Haggard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In Potsdam, we have a lot of rental properties, and they're not owned by big corporations, to my knowledge. Everybody doesn't live in the area, but I'd say predominantly these are mom and pop businesses that either augment a family business or are the entire family business. And so I will be supporting this. And I appreciate Mr. Burke bringing it forward because these people are not the people that own a million giant high rises in New York City and have millions and millions in the bank, even though some of those people may be suffering too. I'm not saying that, but there are many in my district that own 2 or 3 houses, okay? But that makes a big difference in their income. So thank you, Mr. Burke. I will be supporting this.
Mr. Arquette.
Thank you, Kevin. I'll be supporting the resolution as well. The New York Rent Relief Program is a good program, and it's helped a number of folks. But I believe it's only applicable to folks that are making less than 80% of the mean income for the specific area. So I think a lot of folks, even if they're falling on somewhat hard times, wouldn't qualify for that. So I think this is a good resolution, and I'm going to be happy to support it.
Ms. Curran.
I've gotten a number of complaints from constituents that are affected by this because their people in their apartments are not paying. And even some of them that have their rent paid for them, the money comes to them, they're not out of work and they're still not paying their rent and there's nothing they can do about it. So I'll support this. And if I could, I'd like to offer my name as a co-sponsor.
Certainly. Anyone else? Mr. Reagan?
One of the unintended consequences of this is hurting a lot of the families at risk, because a lot of landlords, when apartments do become vacant, are not renting them out because they are very concerned that they have no way of enforcing rent collection. So I think we're also seeing in the county a certain number of people who cannot find a place to live because it's creating even more of a shortage of housing. So I think the sooner that some relief is given to landlords and assurances that they will have their rent paid, the sooner this, the number of people who are living on other people's couches and couch surfing and, scrambling, looking for housing will be averted.
Anyone else? Mr. Forsyth?
I support the whole concept wholeheartedly. My question is, where's the funding going to come from? What mechanism are they going to use to come up with the funds? I just can't even think. The state and its fiscal problems, even with the restaurants in New York City that can't open, and where are they going to get the money to help recoup that? I think it's a great idea. I support it wholeheartedly, but there again, who's going to pay for it and how? I just don't know where it would come from.
Mr. Burke, can you provide an explanation to Mr. Forsyth?
Well, not a good one, but here's what I would say, that burden can't be shouldered by our landlords, and again, I'm certainly very supportive of health and safety for all of our citizens and having shelter, but when rules come down, there needs to be funding to pay for those guidelines, and I can't imagine asking one segment of our county, the landlords, to foot the bill for this. It's just, and I don't have a good answer for you, Dave, other than the fact that we can't point to one group of people and allow them to be victimized.
Okay, anyone else? So I'm going to say that I'm not going to support this resolution, and primarily because it actually specifically names individuals. You have corporations that own hundreds of apartments locally here, town of Messina, and I think that this resolution discriminates against them. I think if we're going to be fair, they may be giant corporations or giant apartment complexes, but they also have giant expenses that go along with it. And I think that if we're going to have a resolution, we need to be fair for all. And for that reason, I won't support it. Kelly, would you do a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Arquette.
Could I pose my question to the county attorney?
I'll allow it. Mr. Button? Go ahead, Tony.
Okay, Mr. Button, if we happen to be a landlord, would this represent an unethical vote to vote on this?
I largely suspected that Mr. Fay was exercising his ability to abstain from voting on this because of his landlord interests and because he could potentially have some ability to gain as a result of it. But there's been a whole bunch of ethical decisions that have been put out there by state bodies, by courts, that have addressed the legislators' ability to vote on an issue generically that they may generically benefit from, but not specifically directed towards them. And they have routinely come down indicating that they do believe that it is possible for those individuals to vote. The example they commonly give is that an individual could vote in favor of reducing taxes. Well, yes, that individual would benefit from the reduction in taxes, but theoretically the entire society would benefit from the reduction in taxes also. So the benefit that they are voting on is not specific to them. It is broad enough to encompass the entire class of citizenry. Mr. Akers, if I may, I would like to address part of your objection. While I recognize that the wording of the resolution was geared towards those individual investors, those mom and pops who may comprise the primary individuals that are responsible for providing rental housing within St. Lawrence County, the resolution itself is not limited to that. Mr. Burke, I think, made it most abundantly clear that the objective here was neither to disparage individuals who are validly harmed as a result of COVID-19, have lost their employment, lost their ability to cover their rent, but to speak on behalf of all landlords, not just those individual investors, but all landlords that are potentially funding the expense of a governmental program where others are not necessarily being called upon to actually cover that expense. So as Mr. Burke and as Mr. Arquette pointed out, there are a lot of people in the COVID situation that are in fact eligible for the rental relief protection that is out there either through one of the 2 prior stimulus bills that the federal government has passed through or through the state. But there are a lot of people, unfortunately, out there who are neither eligible for that benefit nor paying rent that are resulting in a serious burden, not only on the individual investors that I think are so heavily and prominently referenced within the resolution, but also those corporate investors that you referenced. So I think this resolution speaks to both the individual investors as well as the corporate investors.
Thank you, Mr. Button. Okay. Ms. Kelly, we do the roll call vote.
Akers,
No.
Fay,
Dane,
Haggard,
Yes.
Piacco,
Yes.
Burke,
Yes.
Arquette,
Yes.
Terminelli,
Yes.
Curran,
Yes.
Reagan,
Yes.
Forsythe,
Yes.
Lightfoot,
Yes.
Sheridan,
Yes.
Smithers,
Yes.
Denisha,
Yes.
Perkins,
Yes.
13 yes, 1 no, 1 abstain.
Okay, thank you very much, you corporation haters. Mr. Forsythe.
John, I just got thinking, the PPP loans for small businesses, they have to have a loss, perhaps they would fall under that. Maybe, they might be able to fall under that.
Maybe.
Worth looking into.
Okay, let's move on. So for County Administrator's Report, we've got Dylan Soper standing in. And the first resolution is establishing a standard workday for New York State retirement system reporting purposes. Moved by Mr. Perkins, second by Ms. Curran. Dylan, are you with us?
Yes.
Yes, you are.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So upon the new term of appointed or elected official, we are required to bring forward a resolution establishing a New York State retirement system reporting. So this is what the resolution accomplishes.
Okay, any discussion about the resolution? Seeing none, all those that are in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried. I believe the 2020 fourth quarter financial update, Ruth will give us at the board meeting. Is that correct, Mr. Soper?
Yes, if that's okay, we'll move that on to next week.
Okay. Thank you very much. So next up is our committee reports. Mr. Denisha for Cornell Cooperative Extension Board.
Mr. Chairman, I have nothing to report since the last report, other than our meeting is tomorrow evening at 5:30 via Zoom.
All right, thank you, Mr. Denisha. Fish and Wildlife Management Board, Ms. Curran.
We have not met again since the last time I reported.
Okay, thank you. Fisheries Advisory Board, Ms. Terminelli.
We have not met either.
Thank you. Governor Fair Board, Mr. Smithers.
Fair Board has not met.
Okay, thank you. Highway and Solid Waste Committee, Mr. Sheridan.
Chairman, the highway superintendent just covered it quite well. We talked about the outpost buildings.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sheridan. Industrial Development Agency, Mr. Reagan.
The IDA has not met yet. They'll be meeting on Thursday.
Okay, thank you. Recreational Trails Advisory Board, Mr. Arquette.
Thank you, Kevin. Had the good fortune of monitoring the trails personally over the last 3 or 4 days with our recent snowfall, all the way down to Cranberry Lake through Parishville, Colton, all of our hot destinations in Brazier over the last 4 days. And I can just say that I'm very confident that the increase in this quarter's sales tax report is largely due to the trail system. And I thank all of my colleagues for supporting it.
2 million is a lot of money, but we're glad that you're supporting it. Thank you, Tony. St. Lawrence RVRDA, Mr. Forsyth.
Yeah, we did a conference call on Tuesday. The biggest thing, I guess, was with the ready money for business owners along the river from the flooding. There's a 5% local match on a lot of those business projects. So there was extra money that accumulates from projects for the CDEIP money each year. It'll be unused portions. Some people don't go through with their process or don't get the funding or whatever. So Patrick reached out to me and the other members a week and a half ago to see if we'd have interest in helping the people come up with the 5% local match from the excess CDEIP money that's just sitting there. So it counted to about 31,000 for 8 different businesses. 8 or 9 businesses are going to get the benefit from this to help them come up with their match to have the flooding restoration done, which I thought was a good idea. And the other thing was just procurement policy was updated just to bring it into the 21st century a little bit more. But besides that, that's about it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Forsyth. St. Lawrence County Chamber of Commerce, Mrs. Haggard.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Our next meeting is on February 11th, and there's a lot going on, and I will have a full report after that, but I don't have anything to report this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Haggard. Soil and Water Conservation District Board of Directors, Mr. Burke.
Thank you, Kevin. Well, it was the organizational meeting. We met last Thursday. There was discussion about the expansion of solar in St. Lawrence County, and particular mention to the large project that's going to be placed in Messina, Norfolk, and Brazier. We had a report from the state representative who said funding for projects this year looks stable. Staff, the soil and water staff have been working on nutrient management plans, tree brochures, newsletters. The county forester has been setting up data collection, boundary markings, and hiking trails. He's also been working with an Albany firm to examine the efficacy of biocontrols, namely the wasp, the parasitoids that feed on the emerald ash borer larvae and eggs. And just to mention that the St. Lawrence County Soil and Water had their 64th anniversary on our meeting date, 2/21. They've been serving St. Lawrence County very well for all those years.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. That's a very complete report. Okay. So next up, under old and new business, we have a resolution. It has to be removed from the table. Kelly, do I read it off first? Do I read the resolution before we remove it, or? You're muted.
Sorry, yes, you can, Kevin.
Okay, so the resolution that has been tabled is approving a tentative agreement between the County of St. Lawrence and the City of Ogdensburg in relation to the allocation and distribution of money collected from sales and compensating use taxes imposed pursuant to Articles 28 and 29 of the tax law for the term of December 1st, 2021 through November 30th of 2030. Is there a motion to remove from the table? Mr. Forsythe, second by Mr. Nisha and Mr. Reagan. All those in favor signify by saying aye. There is no discussion on the tabling, or is there? Removing it, don't recall. Okay. Well, motion to table, there's not. So Kelly, is there discussion on removal of the table?
No, I don't.
Mr. Button?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay. Okay, so all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, so the resolution is on the table. Discussion. Mr. Smithers.
I have a question of our attorney or somebody. The current formula that we have has the county retaining, I can't tell you the exact number, but well, that number that's retained by the county during the course of this 10 years remain the same because of the effect of Ogdensburg's percentage changing? Or will the percentage going to the towns and villages be changed by that?
So, Harry, Mr. Smithers, this resolution is an extension of 2 years beyond the 1 year that we agreed, which essentially keeps the formula the same. So the city would remain at 6.44% of the 3% and 6.44% of the 1%. So nothing would change.
But that's for
to 2023, not
and
the 10
then
years.
after that, would the county's percentage remain the same? Because there's going to be a difference someplace of
Right.
percentage.
So
who will get the additional funding?
I think that's yet to be determined. It would be either the, as the resolution speaks, maybe Mr. Button could explain, but my explanation is that the city would either preempt or they would come under the towns and the villages formula. Mr. Button, would you like to comment?
I can. It is my understanding that at the end of the 2 years of the additional one, essentially concluding the first 3 years of the 10-year period, the city of Ogdensburg can exercise its right to preempt and impose their own sales tax. If they do so, the remainder of the sales tax that we actually collect would be distributed so that the 43% of the sales tax that currently goes under the first 3% to the towns and villages would continue to go to the towns and villages pursuant to that. So that 6.44% formula provision that went into the city would actually become a part of the county share. And the additional 1% that right now the towns and villages receive essentially 10% of that, they would continue to receive that 10%, that 6.44% previously referenced of the 1% that also would pull into the county share. Now, that's option number one. On the preemptive, option number two is that the city decides that it wishes to accept the formula as it has been identified so that their 6.4% would essentially roll into the towns and villages distributed share. They would be treated for all intents and purposes as a town or village and receive a share that is divided based upon their population as well as their assessed values, which is essentially what is happening for the towns and villages. This is similar to the formula that you would find actually in 1262C of the tax law. And that's what we've imposed with respect to the towns and villages now for quite a few years. So, Mr. Smithers, does that clarify?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Burke.
Well, I'm wondering if maybe you could drill it down a little more. I'm wondering that, so the resolution extends the agreement with Augsburg for 2 years. If Augsburg decides to preempt, then how does the distribution between towns and villages in the county, how does that occur? And if they don't preempt, if they decide to take the same ratio as towns and villages, do the towns and villages share in that 1.96 million or nearly $2 million per year? How does that all work?
I assume that question is posed to me.
Yeah.
I'd be more than happy to answer it. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to answer it essentially with hypotheticals and theoreticals. So I hope you'll follow along with me. So let's assume at the end of year 3, your 2023 year, that the city exercises their option to preempt. They will have to go to their state legislators, as we have frequently, and secure enabling legislation to permit them not only to impose their 3% collection component, but also the additional 1% collection component. It's a very difficult task. If you recall, we have had to lobby for it for years. It was only in this past year, and I largely believe due to COVID, that they decided to enact a 3-year batch of the 1-year extenders or 1% extenders that we have fought for year after year after year for as long as I have been affiliated with the county. But under the preemption theory, that's what the city has to do. They're going to have to go to their legislators. That would be Senator Ritchie most likely, and Assemblyman Walchuk. They'll have to secure enabling legislation. Once that enabling legislation is in place, they will be able to start collecting their own tax. When that enabling legislation is in place, the state comptroller's office will divide the sales tax receipts and send that portion that is received within the designated confines of the jurisdiction of the city of Ogdensburg to the city, and that portion that we are designated under 1262 to the county. The county will then still divvy up pursuant to the agreement that we have essentially codified by resolution a few weeks ago, when the board decided to pass a resolution indicating that they would hold the towns and villages harmless. That meant that we will maintain the percentage distributions that we have always maintained with respect to the towns and villages. That will not change. The city, obviously, if they were to preempt, would be banking on the idea that they would earn more by being able to impose their own tax than they would be entitled to receive if they went under the same formula as the towns and villages. That's a gamble, and there is no guarantee that that will actually occur. So option number one, they preempt, they go to their state legislators, they secure enabling legislation, state comptroller collects, divvies out to both bodies, and then we divvy out from our section to the towns and villages as we have already bound ourselves to do. Option number two is we continue to move forward under this 10-year agreement through to 2030. In 2023, the city decides to opt into our formula. They would do so if they actually believe that due to the size of their population and due to the assessed values of their properties, that they believed that they would receive an amount that would be sufficient to cover their individual liabilities. The interesting thing here, obviously, is that assuming the city decides to roll in with the towns and villages, their 6.44% that Mr. Akers previously referenced, that would become a part of that 43.7 to combined make 50%. So that would actually increase the pot that all the towns and villages would receive. Under that scenario, it's theoretically possible that towns that have larger populations, that have larger assessed values, may actually see an increase in the amount of their distribution because the pot would become larger. That 6.44% from the city of Ogdensburg would essentially be added into the towns and villages to be distributed pursuant to the population and the assessed value, as is identified under tax law section 1262C. The key time period here really becomes 2023. What happens in 2023, whether the city decides that it wishes to exercise its power to preempt, or it wishes to elect to move under the town and village formula for distribution for the remaining years of years 4 through years 10 of the 10-year agreement.
Did any of our scenarios, the last one, the last example that you gave, Steve, where they would be sharing equally with the towns and villages, the nearly $2 million that we have talked about, who would get the vast majority of that?
The vast majority of that, under the hypothetical where the city slides into the towns and villages, would be distributed amongst the towns and villages.
Anything else, Mr. Burke, or does that answer your question?
Well,
You need some more? Go
well,
ahead.
the only thing I would say, it makes me wonder. Before I was thinking that, there was some talk that the money would go to the county, although it wasn't decided that majority would go to the county. But now that it goes to the towns and villages, it becomes more difficult, because for every year we extend Augsburg, in effect, we're taking away from towns and villages. So, and I'm not saying it's necessarily a game changer, but it's certainly more to consider when we make the decision as to what direction to go. Just my 2 cents, but.
I believe Mr. Arquette had his hand up next. Tony? No? Mrs. Haggard?
I like that it goes to the towns and villages, believe me. I also, maybe I'm conflating two things, but there's an elephant in the room, and that is $825,000 in taxes. I guess I'm putting a question out there. Do these two things have anything to do with each other? This is kind of confusing the issue as well. And I'd ask my colleagues to weigh in on this. Am I mixing up things, or is that a consideration that we should?
So, Mrs. Haggard, what we were talking about earlier under the county treasurer's report, that is actually county tax that was collected by the city that is owed to the county. This is sales tax. They are not one and the same, but a debt is a debt. Mrs. Curran.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand what Margaret is thinking, but I think the fact that they're $825,000 behind since I think Renee said 2003 or 4 supports the idea that they need our help for more period of time so that they can pay their bills, not just to us, but to the other people that they owe prior to going out on their own to make that decision whether they preempt or not. They also need time to collect more information prior to making that decision. And I'm hoping that this time that we proposed would help them with that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, we
Mr.
weren't.
Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the county attorney, you have that second option where the city would go under the county or the towns and villages formula, and that they would be the additional, we'll say 2 million, which is shy, would go to all the towns and villages. I was always under the impression that that excess money was going to be going to the county. not the towns and villages, that the city would get their prorated formula out of the 6.44% to be put under the towns and villages. It would share, and then the rest of that would be going to the county. Is that correct?
Mr. Perkins, actually, both responses are correct. And so let me explain once again. In the event that the city exercises their ability to preempt, the 6.4% that they have typically shared as a part of the 100% will be divvied over into the county share. So the county will receive that segment under the preemption. I've tried to stay away from using dollar numbers here and talk about percentages, because I think everybody on this board is aware that the percentages are subject to fluctuation based on a number of factors that we don't control. It's sales tax based on sales. So next year our sales could be down. The year after that our sales could be up. We never know exactly what dollar figure we're actually going to wind up playing with at the end of the period of collection. So under the preemption model, the percentage that Ogdensburg typically received would flow to the county. The towns and villages will always stay whole at 43.7% of the 3% and the 10% of the 1% extender that we have floating on. But if they do not flow to preemption and they flow into the town and village formula in year 3, essentially year 4, but 2023, then that 6.4% would flow into the town and village for distribution as well. So essentially you'd have 50%, 50% under the town village model where the city opts into the town village model, or you'd have 56.4%, 43.7% associated with the preemption model.
Well, I understand the preemption portion, but if they flow under the towns and villages formula, why couldn't the percentage, their 6.4%, be prorated to what the actual formula would be for them to go under the towns and villages, and then the excess percentage of that flow into the county? Because I guess I was always under the impression that the excess money would be going to the county, or excess percentages. And that's the way I would like to see it.
And Mr. Perkins, I have no individual personal preference. It's largely up to the board as to what they want to decide. But I'm telling you how it was communicated to me that the drafting would occur. If the board decides on something differently, I'm not married to any one result.
All right, thank you. Well, I was always under the impression that any excess money was going to the county. That's what I was understanding right from day one. Thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. Forsyth.
Thank you. That was my understanding too, since day one. The goal of this committee was how to generate more money for the county. The fund balances of the towns and villages are all pretty stable. There are some that don't have as much as others, but most of them are pretty stable. But that was always my perception as well. The percentages, I can understand why you want to stay away from the percentages, Mr. Buck, because it's a nightmare. Every time we do it, if they do 43% of the first 3 and 10% of the last 1, it's 35.1% for towns and villages. We voted on a resolution to keep them whole through 2030. Does that mean they get 35.1% of the rest of the money? You know, it just gets skewed The easiest way would be to leave everything as is. We just took in $3.8 million, divvied it up amongst everyone, and everyone's happy. But that isn't going to happen. So this is a compromise. So I'm going to support the 2-year extension. COVID's a factor. I've already been on the phone trying to find out where this $800,000 debt came from. I brought it up at my town board meeting the other night, which is consists of the former treasurer, the former city mayor, and a former legislator. So there was some history that I got, but I'd like to talk to Bill Cosmo also, the former city controller, and get some information from him. So I don't know where that came from. That was as much surprise to me as anyone in this room. So I'm going to support the sales tax. We'll figure out the rest, I'm sure. But I'm ready to vote. Hope everyone does.
Mr. Lightfoot.
You know, we've been hashing this out now for, what, year and a half, pretty close? Here's where we are. And we have a resolution in front of us that is, if passed, will give the city 2 more years over and above the year that was negotiated to make a decision if and when they are going to preempt the county for sales tax. Now, the mayor has said they're going to preempt. Mr. Skelly has said they're going to preempt. I believe that they will preempt. That being the case, we agreed here, as Mr. Button just alluded to, a resolution that guarantees the towns and the villages and the city, if they preempt, essentially the same as they have right now with respect to the percentage of the sales tax that will be distributed. You want to remember this, is that this all came about because of the uncertainty of what the state was going to do with the sales tax monies. Now, we already have seen what some of the things they had to do and done. And because of the, I'm presuming, the revenue of additional sales tax from the online purchases, that we're seeing a significantly increased amount of revenue from the sales tax. That's proven just by the year-end results that we just had. But you've got to remember this, folks, is that there shouldn't be any argument at all about sharing any of that 6.4% with any of the towns or villages. They already get almost 50% more than what the statewide average is. And they did it years ago by the very town supervisors that argue we need more money now. We don't want to change. Well, we didn't change it. We left it the same. The percentage is the same. If sales tax revenue keeps increasing the way it is, everybody's ship goes up. Everybody's, a rising tide floats all boats, as they say. So my feeling has been, is been, will be that 6% should be to the county. We just got done a ton of money for hospitals and nursing homes that are in financial distress. They don't care about counties that are in financial distress or where the money is going to come from to replace the money that they steal from our sales tax revenue. And I've got to say that it ain't over till it's over with respect to what COVID is going to, what kind of havoc it's going to wreak on the state and St. Lawrence County. So for what we are responsible for and the amount of monies associated with that, I think that we would be remiss in not seeing that any of that money that is in excess of the current formula to the state, to the towns and villages and perhaps the city should flow to the county. Thank you.
Mr. Smithers.
Yes, I have a question for our attorney. If you're still there, just a button. Okay, can we not in 2023 decide, depending on whatever happens with the city of Ogdensburg, whether they preempt or not, like several people have mentioned?
I apologize, Mr. Smithers, that you caught me laughing.
How much the county is going to get of that? Is that going to change? This resolution doesn't really state how that's going to be divided up. So is that not something that we can determine at that time? You mentioned something alluding to the fact that we're locked into this way or that scenario, but is that not something that can be determined at that time?
Mr. Smithers, it wouldn't be able to be determined really at the 2023 period, but it would be able to be determined prior to the execution of the current document that we would be working with. So it is theoretically possible that if the board in its infinite wisdom says, Mr. Button, please draft a document that states that the additional 6.4% should the city move into the town and village formula, go to the county, in addition to, in the event that they preempt, it goes into the county, then that's something that I can go ahead and craft language associated with whatever extension agreement for the next 9 years we would be working on. But that's not something we would be able to essentially modify and elect currently associated with the agreement for 2023. We wouldn't do that in 2023, we'd do it right now.
Let's do it.
Mr. Burke.
Well, the challenge for me is I feel like I'm voting on only a piece of the puzzle here, because essentially what we're saying is that this resolution would give Augsburg would keep them at the same level they are now for 2 years, but we don't know what that's compared to, so that let's say we went 1 year, or let's say we went a different amount of time, where that extra money goes. I don't know about anybody else, but it's very important to me. I'd like to know, because if it goes to the towns and villages, if a fairly large amount goes to the towns and villages, I'm far more likely to support it. And I mean, and not that I'm not an advocate for the county, but the county's in pretty good shape, and the county just did very well on the sales tax. So that's, I feel like I'm being asked to vote on something that a big piece of the puzzle isn't there.
So Mr. Button has his hand up, but I want to say that we may think that we're in good shape, but as the auditor's report, our appropriations and our fund balance, we're about 11.67% from what I recall, and the comptroller is recommending 16. So it may seem like we have a lot of money, but we also have a lot of expenses. And as a portion of our levy and our expenditures, we're on the low side. We're lower than any of the municipalities. We're lower than the city. Mr. Button, you had a comment you'd like to make?
I do, thank you. I would draw everybody's attention to the third be it further resolved, or really the second be it further resolved. It makes the point that even if we do the broad strokes of a draft agreement right now, there will have to be a subsequent resolution brought before this board to approve its finalized terms and authorize the chair to sign. In addition, I would note that any agreement that we reach with the city of Augsburg will be subject to the comptroller's review and approval as well. So while I recognize the concern expressed by legislator Burke, I wanted to make the point to legislator Burke that this is definitely not the end of the discussion. We will have to come back. You will have an extra opportunity to decide once again with respect to the percentages of this. So this would just permit me, under the broad strokes of an understanding of the 2-year extension with the overall 9 years to cumulatively make the 10 years, draft up those broad strokes at this point, and we could hammer out the finer details of those percentages amongst the negotiating body at a different point.
Mr. Denisha.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, you certainly have the ability to make anything fairly straightforward and complicated. I've never seen the beat of it. What we've got is a resolution to extend to 2023. That's what the resolution is. It doesn't talk about how the distribution is going to be if Augsburg preempts, if Augsburg takes the same distribution formula. This is simply to give them until 2023. At that point, they make the decision. as Mr. Button says, we have got ample time to decide how we're going to split any additional funds. I think to continue beating that to death is like beating a dead horse. And we should deal with the issue at hand and deal with that at a separate date.
Okay, anybody who hasn't spoken? Mr. Reagan, would you like to speak?
I'm just hoping that the board will come together and support this resolution. I think that giving the city of Ogdensburg time to examine its options, preempting is not as simple as, it's not a simple matter. The city still needs a great deal more information than it currently has before it can make an intelligent decision. The number $1.9 million was bandied about earlier. There's no guarantee that such a figure actually exists. When the city decides to preempt, several people have said that they feel the city will actually make more money or close to what it's currently making on sales tax. If so, that $1.9 million doesn't exist. I think it's this issue has divided this board long enough. I think we've spent way too much time on a issue that has only divided community against community, legislator against legislator. It's time for us to end this divisive issue and focus on the real priorities facing this county. As many people have pointed out many times, there is no one except for people in this room who are advocating that we take money from the city of Ogdensburg. Most people across the county, feel that we should be working together and not creating divisive issues that all they do is tear us apart. So I would urge everyone to vote yes on this so that we can focus on the many accomplishments that this board has achieved and work together on the real problems facing the county and addressing ways to make life better for the citizens of this county who elected us and who are looking to us for leadership and urging us to focus our attention on how we can make St. Lawrence County a better place to live. Thank you.
Okay, so I thought you'd bring up something about extortion, but I guess not. So let's, yeah, that's probably right. So let's conclude this. First of all, I disagree with our sales tax chairman, Mr. Forsyth. Mrs. Haggard, do you have something more before I do the final comments? Go ahead, please.
Voting for this is voting against the interest of the people that I represent. In the spirit of trying to be a county legislator, I'd offer the amendment, if there's any interest in this ending in 2022 rather than 2023, if there's any stomach for that. Thank you.
Is that a motion, Mrs. Haggard?
Yes.
Is there a second? Second by Mr. Burke. Discussion on the amendment proposal to make it 1 year instead of 2 years. Mr. Lightfoot.
I'm actually against 1 year or 2 years. We have just negotiated an extension to the current agreement for a year. Now the city and its proponents want to give them 2 more years to make their decision. It seems to me that they have enough information right now and that they're able to make a decision. They're never, and I repeat, never going to come up with a figure of what sales tax is generated in the city of Ogdensburg, not until it happens. I tried in the past month to get that information. I couldn't get it. Not that I'm able to get every bit of information that's out there, but it's not there. Nobody keeps track of it. All it is somebody saying, hey, we think we can do it. Okay, if you think you can do it, why do you need 3 years to make up your mind? When you've already said in the form of the city manager and the current mayor that they are going to preempt. The second thing is that this board is remiss in its duties by kicking this into the hands of another board. It's our problem. We should be taking care of it. 2 years. That would give them 1 more year on to the current year that they have already negotiated. If that isn't enough time, maybe it's time you move out of being a city and do something else. I would strongly consider voting in favor of that. And I've flopped around on this a heck of a lot more than I want to flop around. I am not a flopper. But this is ridiculous, what we have allowed the city to drive us into and to put a wedge between half of this board and the other half. And I think what we need to do is to very strongly consider this resolution. And if we're going to do something, let's make it a reasonable amount of time. Let's take responsibility for this. We've been doing it for 1.5 years. Do we really want to pawn this off on some buddies that may be on this board in 3 years? I don't, for one.
So I'm not sure you're saying you support the amendment?
Well, you'll have to wait on the vote.
Okay, all right, I wasn't sure. Anyone else? Okay, so Kelly, let's do a roll call on the amendment. The amendment is to change this resolution instead of 2 years, it'd be to 1 year.
Fay,
Who'd you call?
Dan,
Mr. Fay,
No.
Haggard,
Yes.
Piacco,
Yes.
Burke,
Yes.
Arquette,
Yes.
Terminelli,
Yes.
Curran,
No.
Reagan,
No.
Forsythe,
No.
Lightfoot,
Yes.
Sheridan,
No.
Smithers,
No.
Denisha,
No.
Perkins,
No.
Akers,
yes.
7 yes, 8 no.
Okay, so the resolution fails. So we're back on to the original resolution. Any further discussion? Okay, so I'm going to make my final remarks. So we started out, I disagree with the sales tax chairman that the initial purpose of this renegotiations was to increase county funds. Your proposal to take $600,000 from the city because you thought, or your calculations, that they received too much of that 1%, which they were receiving 900 and some thousand. And where the rest of the counties or the rest of the municipalities were sharing 1.4. I could go along with that, but it was simply because, in my mind, about the AIM money, which is $1.5 million, which the county got foot with the bill. And then also later on, shortly after, with the COVID hit, this emergency hospital fund of $500,000. So the county is out a gross amount of $2 million. So that any money that would come in from this renegotiation would be going towards those expenditures that the county had the total burden. So there's been a lot of comments made, and some of them not helpful, some of them hurtful, whatever. But before I went out the door, my wife said, "You got to work with these people for the next 2 years." So I've mellowed over the time. But the overwhelming comment was that the towns don't want any more or they don't want any less. And we solved that with a resolution here back in January. What I don't understand, and I never did understand, was the unwillingness to wait for the census. Because this is what the problem is. What was right in 2000 was based on an actual number that the city was actually receiving. And that 6.44 is what they were actually getting. 10 years later, the census changes. It is changing for the communities that you represent. Messina, you get 200 or 300 homes that were for sale at one point in time with the closure of the plants. You're going to see a different percentage. And certainly, as we go into 2020, the population of the city of Ogdensburg has declined even further. As I've said over and over, the three drivers for sales tax are car dealerships, building and hardware supply places, and restaurants. And you look at what the city of Ogdensburg has now compared to 2000, compared to particularly, and I say the village of Potsdam and the town of Potsdam. The city of Ogdensburg doesn't have any car dealerships anymore. They have a Lowe's, which sells building supplies. Where Potsdam has 4 car dealerships, they have 4 building supply places, counting Lowe's. Ogdensburg has a Walmart. Potsdam has a super Walmart. Potsdam has about 30 restaurants. Ogdensburg doesn't have 30 restaurants. Potsdam has anywhere, depending on the year, anywhere between 6,000 and 10,000 students running around spending their parents' money. The population of Ogdensburg back in 2010 was about $7,000 people. So just in the student population alone, and I don't represent the village of Potsdam, just that alone equals what the city actually has in population. And the formula for the towns is population and assessment. The city of Ogdensburg last year received $3.8 million, where Messina, which is the same size, same population, same assessed value, got 1.8, a $2 million difference. Now, Mr. Reagan has been mentioning about the differences in services. There are some differences. He mentions the foreclosure. Our process is 3 years. Their process is immediate. So it's not apples to apples, but it's close. So for people that want to get over it, it is a complex subject. It talks about the finances for the municipalities in the city for the next 10 years. It's a serious conversation. My thing all along has been about what's fair. I don't really care what the city of Augsburg, how they got to the position they're in. That's their responsibility. And people have said, you don't want to bankrupt the city. Nobody wants to bankrupt the city. The city has done things on their own. And I might add, under Republican leadership, 16 years of Bill Nelson, 4 years of Wayne Ashley, and now we have Mayor Skelly. Others have said, we are the parents, and the county is the parent. These are our children. Well, in my house, I treat all my children differently. Some of them require more maintenance. So what are we saying to the village of Potsdam with the revenue that they're generating versus what's being generated in the city? How is that fair to the village of Potsdam and the town of Potsdam, which the town of Potsdam has some of the highest rates of taxation in the county? How is that fair to them? So, and the problem is, as we've all mentioned, I'll go back to my first point, is the towns don't want any more or less. Well, maybe the town boards don't want any more or less, but the people of these towns actually really don't know. They really don't know what we're actually contemplating. We don't know what the city of Augsburg will get if they preempt and what the remainder is. But what we do know, which is part of the resolution in 2019, is if the city entered into the same sharing arrangement as the towns and villages, what they would get. And I'm going to base this on the 2019 sales tax number of 61,600,000 versus this year is 63.6. So we're a couple million extra budget. But I'm going to go through this by district. In District 2, which is Legislator Forsyth's district, in the 1 year, if the city was in the same sharing formula, they'd be giving up about 78,000. So over a 3-year period of time, Lisbon's giving up $234,000. And I know from talking to a Lisbon town board member, Lisbon's talking about raising taxes. Mr. Lightfoot's district, Morristown and Oswegatchie, that 3-year total is $382,000. In Mr. Smithers, which is DePoyson, the town of Gouverneur, the village of Gouverneur, that total over 3 years, which would be denied those citizens of those municipalities, $354,000. And for Mr. Sheridan, who represents Edwards, Fowler, Hammond, Macomb, Pickering, and Rossi, the 3-year total is $582,000 that those municipalities would not be receiving if we go ahead with this agreement. And the city joined us in that sharing formula. For Mr. Denisha, who represents Clifton, DeKalb, Fine, Herman, and Russell, it's $612,000 over the 3 years. For Mr. Perkins, who represents Clare, Colton, Hopkins, Parrishville, and Pierpont, your 3-year total is $774,000. For me, I represent Madrid, Canton, and Potsdam, but I'm just going to say Madrid because Potsdam and Canton is divided up over a few legislators. For me, for Madrid, my town of Madrid is $90,000. For Mr. Fay in the village, his 3 years is $243,000. For Mrs. Haggard in the village of Potsdam, it's $336,000. For Ms. Fiacco in the town of Stockholm, it's $183,000 is the 3-year total. For Mr. Burke, which I only put down Norfolk for you, Mr. Burke, is $216,000 for 3 years. For Mr. Arquette, for Brazier and Lawrence, it's $210,000 over the 3-year period. For Ms. Terminelli in the village of Messina, it's $498,000. For Ms. Curran in the town of Waddington, the village of Waddington and Louisville, it's $315,000. And because Canton, Messina, and Potsdam are split up over various legislators, the town of Canton is out $243,000 over the 3-year period. The town of Messina is out $192,000 over the 3-year period. The town of Potsdam is out $330,000. So part of that resolution, and that is of no benefit to the county, that is just taking the city of Augsburg share and based on the population and the assessed value of what the city is, and that remains into the town and villages formula. Those are the amount of monies that the people that you represent do not know. And I doubt that your town boards or your village, city councils or whatever they are, village people know either. That's a lot of money. When this resolution first was discussed, I asked Mr. Reagan if he supported the whereas where at the end of the term of the 3 years that the city would either preempt or they would go into the village or town formula. I said, do you support that? He said, no. I go, it's part of the resolution. Well, I don't support that, which means to me that Mr. Reagan is not going to support anything in the future other than for Ogdensburg to continue to receive in excess of what they probably actually have earned. And I believe with the 2020 census due in March, that you're going to find that 2020 census will show a further decline in the population of Ogdensburg, and that those numbers will be even greater. So you can be either fair to everyone, or you can decide if you pass this resolution, that's the amount of money based on 2019 sales tax that was generated based on population assessment. That's what you're supporting. So Kelly, would you do a roll call vote, please?
Haggard?
No.
Tiaco?
No.
Burke?
No.
Arquette?
No.
Terminelli?
No.
Curran?
Yes.
Reagan?
Yes.
Forsythe?
Yes.
Lightfoot?
No.
Sheridan?
Yes.
Smithers?
Yes.
Denisha?
Yes.
Perkins?
Yes.
Akers?
No.
Fay?
No.
7 yes, 8 no.
Okay, the resolution fails. Okay, so Dylan, are you with us? Do we have a need for executive session?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we do for negotiations, litigation, and appointments.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, could I talk about some new business first?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm sorry, Bill. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I would like to make something clear before we go into executive session on a subject matter that we're going to be talking about, which happens to be with the Board of Elections, that has nothing to do with the facts of that case. But I want to talk about a change in my position on a previous statement that I've made into the newspapers. I have talked to the county attorney, and he has reviewed the materials that are involved with the allegations that are against Elections Commissioner Bacon. Mr. Button has reached the conclusion that there does not appear to be sufficient evidence to sustain the belief that Miss Bacon violated St. Lawrence County ethics laws. His findings support the notion that the actions of Miss Bacon were entirely accidental. And in order to sustain the finding of a violation, the actions of the accused must be formulated and perpetrated intentionally. So the evidence he found in his review supports the position that Miss Bacon did not intend to send the original materials or utilize county resources to further private objectives. And as a result of Mr. Button's findings, I will not be making that recommendation that I initially said I was going to be making to refer this matter to the Board of Ethics. I wanted to get that out there before we had our executive session to talk about this. I did want to say in open session that while Mr. Button while his finding serves as a recommendation that the matter not be submitted to the Board of Elections, I still stand by, and I'm sure that everyone agrees that the rules are that anyone can submit their own complaints, including the individual legislator or the person on Congresswoman Stefanik's staff, Mr. DeGrasse. So with that, I just wanted to make it clear that I was not going to be going into this executive session saying that I was going to make that recommendation referral, because I'm not going to at this point now.
Thank you, Mr. Sheridan. Mr. Burke.
Sorry. I'm glad you clarified that, Bill. I would like to say, contrary to what you said, the only people that can ask for an ethics opinion is the person himself or a person you supervise. And of course, Jenny does not fit either of those criteria. She is supervised by the Democratic Party, not by us, and not by any one individual. So our ability to ask for an ethics ruling is limited. And if I'm wrong, Steve, please correct me.
Mr. Burke, what I heard Mr. Sheridan indicate was that he was not going to recommend that the matter be referred to the Board of Ethics. I didn't hear him indicate that he intended to refer it as an advisory opinion, wherein you would be absolutely correct, Mr. Burke. An advisory opinion may only be requested by an individual regarding their own prospective behavior or by a supervisor. And given the unique circumstances with which an elections commissioner is selected, there is significant question as to who is the election commissioner supervisor. The election commissioner theoretically is acting in a state capacity when performing their responsibility. They are selected by their own party committees, and the Board of Legislators merely acts in a confirmatory role in the confirmation process. But what I heard Mr. Sheridan indicate was that he would not be referring the matter with purpose of complaint, and perhaps I'm misunderstanding. But Mr. Sheridan seemed to suggest that anyone has the ability to file a complaint under our local ethics law, and I believe that is correct. Anyone has the ability, including Mr. DeGrasse or Ms. Stefanik, if she so chooses to do so. But I believe Mr. Sheridan was indicating at this point he had no intention of making a recommendation to this board of any type of a referral, whether it be as an advisory opinion, which, as I agree with you, cannot be done at this point, or in the form of complaint.
John, just a note, you've disappeared off of video. I don't know, when you went to hit your mute button, you killed your screen. There you are. There's that smiling face. Mrs. Haggard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm delighted to hear Mr. Sheridan's change of opinion on this issue. I do want to point out, though, that I'm concerned about our use of the press when talking about personnel matters. It's humiliating, and I don't think it does our employees or anybody who works for the county any good to talk to the press about this. And, you know, we're talking in open session right now, but I would hope that Ms. Bacon would be afforded an apology for this being an issue over the past week or so, however long it's been going on. But I do appreciate that Mr. Sheridan has changed his mind. Thank you.
Mr. Sheridan, would you care to respond?
No, I just look forward to doing executive session, and we can maybe hear some facts regarding the case, but those are the issues that I thought it was safe to talk about outside of executive session.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sheridan. Okay, motion go into executive session made by Mr. Forsyth, second by Mr. Smithers. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay,